lots of talks before, but I know some of you will be new. Essentially, I'm going to pass over to Bruce Parker in a minute to do some introductions, and Bruce will then pass over to Dean Catherine.
Yes.
The talk will be for about until about 10 to 8, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions. You can either send questions on the chat, or you can email them to me, or you can just shout out your questions. And if there's any questions that we don't have time to deal with, we can deal with those offline. I think that's all from me, so I'm going to pass over to Bruce now.
Hello, good evening everybody, and welcome. Really nice to see you all again. Doesn't seem long since we were all together. Looking forward very much to this evening. I'm not really going to say anything much at all. It's really delighted to have Madam Dean with us this evening. She's actually our president, so welcome, Madam President, as well. I'm fascinated by the title, What I Didn't Learn at Theological College, because one would expect perhaps the Dean to be telling us what she did learn. So, you know, absolutely fascinating. So, Dean Catherine, I'll hand over to you now, and you know, off you go, and we're looking forward to it very much.
Thank you so much, and good evening everybody. It's lovely. I've been just going through all the pictures of faces, and it's lovely to see you all. So thank you so much for coming to this lecture and sharing this time with me. And I'm going to talk about what I didn't learn at Theological College, or what they didn't teach me at Theological College. And this is my Theological College, Westcott House in Cambridge. Some of you may recognise it. And I think I should start with a disclaimer, because I went to Theological College. Now, if you weren't all muted, you could all gasp. I went to Theological College 35 years ago. Come on. How can it be so long ago, Catherine? I am that old. Although I was very young when I went. I was very young when I went to Theological College. And 35 years ago, what I remember from Theological College, I was there for 3 years. The first 2 years I studied for the Tripos BA undergraduate degree. And I remember for 3 years, I read theology books and novels and poetry, and I wrote essays, and I went to chapel, and I prayed, and I made lovely friends, some of whom I'm still close friends with now. And that was it, really. But there is a disclaimer here, because it's very different now. And I know that the students in Westcott House are much more clued up and switched on, and they do all sorts of practical and vocational things. But when I went to college, it was academic theology, really. So I had a lot to learn when I left. I went to study at Cambridge because I'd grown up in Cambridge. I'd left school and gone to university in Leeds, and I was there for 6 years. And when I had a vocation to ordination, everything in my life was changing. I decided it might be a good idea to go back to Cambridge, which I knew, which felt familiar, and Mum and Dad were close by. I was 24 when I went to Theological College. So a young vocation, really. And went back to Cambridge where things were familiar. Of course, in those days, I was one of a very small handful of women at the college, but had a very happy time there. And when I left after 3 years to go back to work in Leeds, I think that I felt that what I was going to do was share the gospel, grow the church, and serve people. That was essentially share the gospel, grow the church, and serve people. And actually, I think that's still the case. I think that probably is still my task. So that hasn't changed, but I've learned so much along the way, and I'm really grateful to the Church of England. And really, a subtitle of this talk, after what they didn't teach me at Theological College, would be, what's the point of the Church of England? So I'm going to show you some more pictures, if I can work out how to do that. Oh dear, I'm just going to need some help from Lucy about how I move these pictures on.
If you go back into your PowerPoint,
Yeah,
and then operate it as normal.
yeah.
So Alt and Tab to get across to your slides.
Oh, right.
Does that work?
Oh,
yeah.
How did I do that? Well, anyway, whatever I did, it worked. Now, you may recognise this cathedral. I haven't told you what it is, but it's Ripon Cathedral. So Ripon Cathedral is the cathedral for Leeds, and I was sponsored by Ripon Diocese, so I went back to Ripon Diocese to be ordained in 1988. And that photograph there, that lovely man at my side, is my dear dad, sadly now departed, Jack Ogle. And there's me with really long hair in those days, my lovely sister Viv behind me with lots of hair as well. That was 1988, and I was ordained a deacon. Now, deacons, as you know, normally would be priested in the next year, but that couldn't happen for me because women weren't yet allowed to be ordained in the Church of England as priests, so I remained a deacon for 6 years. I waited to be priested, and in that time, I didn't waste my time, because between ordination as deacon and ordination as priest, there's Robin again, our lovely son Tom was born. His lovely little chubby fingers in that photograph when he was about 18 months, I think, when I was ordained deacon. And again, outside Ripon Cathedral, I was ordained priest in 1994. By then I'd served my curacy and also been seconded to BBC Leeds to be their religious affairs editor. So that's what I did while I was waiting to be priested. Once I was priested, I was able to become a vicar, and this is where I really started learning what they didn't teach me at Theological College. I had a great privilege of serving as vicar in a parish in the Wakefield diocese, between Wakefield and Barnsley. You might know Woolley, and you might know the other part of my parish, West Breton. It was Woolley with West Breton. West Breton is where the Yorkshire Sculpture Park is. You may have been there, or you may have called in at Woolley Edge Services on the M1, which is just south of Leeds. So my parish kind of straddled the M1, and this was one of my churches. Absolutely beautiful medieval church. And actually, when we went to spy it out, when I knew that the bishop was going to offer me this parish, we drove down, and my word, as we saw the beautiful church in the village in the middle of farms and fields, Robin said, "Good grief, Catherine, it looks just like Dibley." Do you remember? It really did look like the opening credits of The Vicar of Dibley, and that was the parish of St. Peter's Woolley. My other church was this lovely church, which was a refurbished Methodist chapel, and inside it was clean and serene. It was absolutely lovely. And I shared this church with a Methodist minister because we were a local ecumenical partnership, and I had 3 marvellous Methodist colleagues while I was there. So I was vicar of Woolley with West Breton. And this was where I learnt my first lessons, really, because after everything you've been taught at college and as a curate, really, you don't know really what you learnt until you serve for the first time as a vicar. The buck stops with you. And I tell you, it's quite a scary, intimidating place to be, with the spiritual and practical responsibilities. So here was the first thing I learnt that I hadn't been taught. And really, it's so obvious that I would be responsible for a building. I knew nothing about this whatsoever, not the first thing, and no one had ever mentioned it to me. It sounds ridiculous, but it came as quite a surprise. And I think what I realised was, if I didn't love the building of the church, then people wouldn't really believe that I loved them. There's a really close connection, and I don't think it's just in villages, but when people love their church, you have to love it too, or else you can't love them. There's something to do with bricks and mortar that relates to flesh and blood. And of course the church is people. And when, as we've recently experienced, churches have to be shut, the church is still alive because the church is people. But I learnt that buildings are very important. Buildings such as this one carry our traditions and our identities and enable us to be community. And you know, that was as true with this ancient church as it was with the more contemporary Methodist building. People loved their buildings and they meant so much to them. So I learnt as a vicar how to climb scaffolds and how to look at mortar joints and what to do when the rain came in. And I shared that with the church wardens, obviously, but I had to become really interested. And part of the character of the Church of England, I came to realise, was caring for the nation's heritage. This is inside the church, and I've just got a close-up on the right there of a beautiful medieval stained glass window of Christ's crucifixion, which is just behind me actually in that side chapel there. So this was on the north side of the church, and this is during a flower festival. And I show you that flower festival because I also learnt that the Church of England is best when it's fuzzy at the edges. Because in the village, of course, I had a regular congregation of about 40 people. But what I learnt was every single person in that village had a relationship with the church. And I wasn't just to look after the congregation. I was there to serve the whole parish. And unless people told me otherwise, I was there as their vicar to serve them, regardless of whether they came to church. I would baptise, marry and bury anyone in my parish. And actually our church grew because I took on a growing number of weddings. I did weddings if I possibly could, and the church grew, not from the wedding couples themselves, because they often moved off somewhere else, but the church grew because their parents in their 50s and 60s came to church during the wedding prep and they stayed, and that's how the congregation grew. So I learnt not just to serve those who came to church, but to serve my whole parish. And I remember as a young woman, a funeral director ringing me up and saying, "Catherine, I don't know what you'll make of this, but a farmer has died in West Breton, and well, he was a really strong atheist, but his family are wondering whether you would conduct his funeral service." And I was really anxious about this. As a young priest, I didn't want to let Christ down, and I didn't want to let anyone down. But I remembered what I'd been taught before I got ordained, to serve my parish. And so I did take that funeral, and we wrote the liturgy for it, really, but we did include the Lord's Prayer, and I did say people there will want to say the Lord's Prayer. So we wrote him a funeral service. And you know what? It was a beautiful service in West Breton Church, and it was very dignified. And afterwards, his daughter and his 3 grandchildren all came for baptism. So I felt something really wonderful had happened in that. He might have been an atheist, but his daughter and his grandchildren wanted to be baptized and to join the church. So a really lovely thing happened. So I learnt, love your buildings and serve your parish. So after, oh, this is a beautiful, I couldn't resist showing you this, a beautiful little medieval stained glass window. Isn't that just, look at those funny little feet. Isn't that just charming? It was such a lovely, you can see I did come to love that church. So then after, I don't know how to go back, I don't think. Oh, there we are. After Woolley, I was invited to go and look at Huddersfield Parish Church, which was vacant. And I went to Huddersfield Parish Church in 2001, the centre of Huddersfield, traditionally a wool town, but more latterly a very significant university town, and into modern design and technology and lots of new things. And this fine Victorian church with a very tall tower was set in this lovely town square. Oh, I've just realised I learnt about taking care of public space, but we'll come to more of that later. Huddersfield Parish Church has a fine musical tradition. This is their choir quite recently. Lots of university students joined their choir. And as you can see, there's a lovely baldacchino, a golden baldacchino behind them, and a very fine interior. And just recently when I went, I took this photograph of the interior because we did masses of work to that building, outside and inside. It was quite poorly built, actually. And I left before the work was finished, so it was lovely to come back and see it looking absolutely magnificent. So when I went to Huddersfield, I was asked to go and put it back on the map. It had just sort of fallen into the doldrums a little bit. So that was what I was tasked to do. So we did lots of regular things, like a Christmas fair in the church, which worked really well, and lots of people came. And we used to do a Christmas tree light switch on. And I remember one year the pantomime contacted us and said, can we send one of our pantomime characters to switch the lights on for you? I thought, yes, great, what could possibly go wrong? So when he turned up, it was Merlin. I thought, oh crikey, what kind of religion was he? And it was just at the time when Harry Potter was a bit controversial amongst Christians. But anyway, we had the photo taken and it appeared on the front page of the paper, and I think we got away with it. But in terms of serving the parish, we also did unusual things. This was an example of something that was very different and perhaps a bit edgy. I was approached by a social worker who worked with the women who worked on the streets in Huddersfield as sex workers. One of the women had just recently been killed, and she wanted a memorial service for women locally who had been killed over the last decade in the course of their work, who had died. And you can see there we had a very simple but very dignified naming ceremony for them, and we served the parish. But what was new for me in Huddersfield, the lesson I learned, was how to be Church of England in a multi-faith context. And this was the first time I'd ever encountered this. Growing up in Cambridge, going then to a village church, I hadn't really met people of different faiths, but in Huddersfield, I met Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and Jews, Baha'is, and all different denominations of Christianity, including Quakers. And I realised that while I'd never been that interested in the study of other faiths, I was really interested in people and how we live together in a town like Huddersfield well, and how we can get beyond tolerating one another to really getting to know one another and enjoying one another. And I think that I learnt that part of the purpose of the Church of England as the established church is to be hospitable and generous to people of other faiths. So one of the things I got involved with was a Home Office funded project to enable the faith communities to open their doors and welcome children and talk to them appropriately. So instead of telling them facts that they could learn in books, we just arranged for them to meet people of that faith community who could talk to them and say, well, as a Christian, this is what I do and this is what I believe. Or as a Muslim, this is what I do and this is what I believe. And I'm very, very proud of that project, which was award-winning at the time. The other thing that we did, oh dear, I'm really going ahead now. Here we are. The other thing that we did was just make friends and do things together. So here you can see me walking with the Bishop of Wakefield now, although then he was the Bishop of Pontefract. You can see we're walking through the streets and just chatting with one another and going to each other's places of worship and just witnessing really to our friendships. And all of that was really, really important, because I learned that when you've got those friendships in place, if something difficult or distressing happens, you've got the relationships in place that you can come together and help the community stay together. So I'm going to show you now a picture that relates to a really sad experience and a shocking experience we had in Huddersfield, where a taxi driver, Mr. Mohammed Parvez, who worshipped in a mosque in my parish and lived in my parish with his family, accepted a booking, and he went out to a village south of Huddersfield. And when he got there, he was attacked by some youths in that village who'd rung for the taxi, and he died. And this, can you imagine how shocking this was to him and his family and community, but also to the village, the church in the village, and the parents of the youngsters. And when this happened, the village desperately wanted to express its remorse, and they wanted to visit the family and the mosque if possible, but they didn't want to cause offence in any way. And we found that with us and the police and the council working together, we managed to enable people to meet. And this culminated, I can't tell you what it was like. The village was having a vigil of prayer to remember Muhammad and to pray for him. And while I was there, and we were lighting candles, and some of Muhammad's family came up to that village and came into the church and spent some time with us in silence. And really, it was the most incredible generosity of spirit that they would come and do that. So because we'd got these friendships in place, we knew one another. We knew the churches and the mosques and the gurdwaras. We were able to really help a community have social cohesion. And I really learned a very, very important lesson that I certainly never learned at Theological College. Then in 2010, I moved to Birmingham Cathedral to be Dean. Because of my experiences in Huddersfield, someone had suggested to me that really perhaps I should consider next being a dean, because deans need to love liturgy, love buildings, and love working with congregations and the wider community. So I applied for this job and was interviewed and was appointed to be Dean of Birmingham in 2010. And I don't know whether you know it, but it's like a jewel box in the middle of the nation's second city. It's really beautiful. And I was asked to go and help them sort out their finances, which were in a terrible state, and also to help them celebrate their 300th anniversary in 2015. So I can't resist showing you this. This is Robin and Thomas in 2010. And that's the lovely June Osborne and the lovely Viv Fall. Both were deans at the time, both are bishops now, outside the cathedral on a lovely sunny day when I was installed. Look at, and that's the inside of the cathedral, which is really small, and that's how we managed to celebrate an ordination service, really joyful event, and a really packed cathedral. So look, that's the cathedral shortly after it was built. It was built as a church, and as you see, it's at the top of a hill in 17 something, probably 1730. And you can see fields and some fine houses around it. This is Birmingham Cathedral now. Isn't that a lovely contrast? And can you see it erupts like a little green volcano in the middle? And you wouldn't know it was at the top of a hill, would you? The city has sort of overwhelmed it. And every day about 30,000 people rush past. and I was in charge of that public space, gosh. But I learnt the power of a cassock. I learnt that if I wore a cassock, I could talk to anyone in Birmingham. So what did I learn there that I hadn't been taught at Theological College? I'd already learnt about a multi-faith living, but I learnt, I think, about what the established church can mean to other people. And this rather took me by surprise. Here's a picture of lovely David Urquhart, the Bishop of Birmingham. And actually the Roman Catholic Archbishop is just behind him. And as I look at those faces, I knew all those people, all those dear men. And there is a woman behind the rabbi on the left. And what I learnt in Birmingham was all those people, including the Roman Catholic Archbishop, really appreciated the role that the bishop had in the nation, in Parliament, in the House of Lords. They really appreciated my role as Dean and the role of the Church of England Cathedral. There's a Roman Catholic cathedral, of course, in Birmingham, but we never felt competitive with each other. They were really pleased that we were the established church and that they weren't actually. All of those dear people really appreciated the bishop's role in the House of Lords, and they saw them as not just representing the Church of England, but representing faith in the nation. And they liked the fact that the bishops were there. I didn't know that before, and that was a really interesting lesson to learn. They expected him to represent them, and he was very proud to do that. So that was something I hadn't been taught. This is a beautiful, beautiful stained glass window in Birmingham Cathedral by Edward Burne-Jones, and it's one of 4 magnificent windows. If you haven't been in, do pop in. They're beautiful works of art. So the second lesson I learned there was about how working with the arts can enable people of all different backgrounds to have a profound encounter with God and with one another. So for our 300th anniversary, one of the things we did was art projects with artists from different faith backgrounds. This artist is a man called Jake Lever, and he's a Christian. And he devised this beautiful work of art, which was lots of individual gold boats, which were strung up on wire that was so thin you could hardly see it. And they shimmered and they moved slightly as the air in the cathedral circulated. It was absolutely beautiful to sit underneath this shining flotilla. People loved them. And these had been made in a series of workshops, some of which were held outside the cathedral in that lovely green space. And we invited people to come in and write about their lives and fill up their soul boat with whatever they wanted to put in it. I think I filled mine with people that I loved and saints who had influenced me. But can you see, it attracted all these young people that day, which was great. We had a whole variety of people who came, and as they came, they'd chat together and engage, and it was a beautiful community project. Here's Jake, who's the artist, Jake Lever at the back there, with a class of Birmingham school children. And you can see it was really great for people of all ages and all different backgrounds. And there it was. And we just had the interior of the cathedral redecorated. And I remember my community committee being really worried that it would mark the new painting. But of course it didn't. And they were quite anxious about this installation all round, really. But after it was up, they loved it. And when it came down, they said, when can we have it back? But actually, they couldn't have it back because all of those boats were returned to the people who'd made them. And in fact, I've got mine. And I remember the boats right at the front of the flotilla. One was from a Jewish youngster, one was from a Muslim, and one was from a Christian. So, oh, and that was, I couldn't resist showing you this. This is a local vicar talking to some of his parishioners. And behind him is a graffiti artist, an Arabic graffiti artist called Mohammed. And we worked with him, and he actually did one of those huge graffiti with aerosol sails in the cathedral. Here he's working outside that church, and he used to say how, although he was a big bloke and he knew people found him intimidating, when he was painting with his back to people, all sorts of people would come up and talk to him, and he realised he wasn't in the least bit intimidating when he was painting in public. So the lessons that I'd learnt so far, and these were lessons that I brought to Winchester with me, is love your building, serve your whole parish, work with other faiths and anyone of goodwill. I learnt that the establishment is really important to members of other faiths. And I learnt that art can bring people together in really exciting ways. So those were some of the lessons I learnt before I came here to Winchester in 2017. I don't know if you've seen this picture before, but I wanted to show you because I really like this picture. Just before I was going to be unveiled, and some of you may have been there, which was really a lovely day. There's myself with Annabelle, the Receiver General. And it looks like we had a memo about what we would wear, but we didn't. And there's Bishop Tim and Robin and Thomas, my son, with Canon Rowley, because we were about to come in and say hello. And I said, has it been announced by Downing Street? We'd better just check. And so they're just, Tom's just on his iPhone checking the Downing Street website just to check that we weren't jumping the gun and that it was official. And this photograph too was taken on that day, and I really like that. I've got a big photograph of that in our house. One of the great privileges of being dean is that I get to go places that other people don't get to. So do you remember when I arrived? Oh gosh, really the east end of the cathedral was full of scaffolding. Do you remember? And we couldn't see the ceiling for a long time. But I did love going up and looking around and beginning to learn how to love this building. I mean, which is not a challenge, is it? It's easy to fall in love with this building, but to really love it and care for it takes such a lot of time and effort. And I've just started really in that process of learning about this lovely building. And there's something about the heritage here which is so moving. So this is the face of Christ on Veronica's towel in 3D, so it's vivid from below. Oh, look at that exquisite face. Isn't that just? And the hair that looks like croissants. There's something about the beauty of this place and the care and it's such a deeply moving building. It takes you to the heights and the depths and the breadths, really, of your imagination and your heart and your mind. It's a big place. And one of the things I wasn't taught at college, but I've learnt over the years, is it's really important to articulate the story of where you are and also where you're hoping to go. And as you know, the cathedral chapter have articulated this with a prayer from the Eucharistic prayer, taking 3 key images from the cathedral: renew us by your Spirit, inspire us with your love. That's a page of the Winchester Bible. Inspire us with your love and unite us in the body of Christ. And that's, of course, the Great West Window. So I have learnt it's important to have a focus and to tell our story as well as we can. And here we're articulating the calling and the vision, and really these things are tested by how they help you to work. Something I never dreamt about at Theological College was the church in a time of pandemic. And what would be the role of the church in a crisis such as that? And we've found in the last few months the cathedral vision and the cathedral values of openness and excellence and kindness have been tremendously helpful, have given us a really, really helpful steer. So being a Christian minister in a time of pandemic, do you remember those early days when people went and shopped to excess and the shelves were empty? And we were learning how to be in public and keep each other safe. Then we went into lockdown, and now we're learning again how to be together but keep each other safe. And in a pandemic and in a lockdown, how it affects us. So the crisis affects the world, it affects the nation, it affects the economy, but it affects every family and every individual. And a lot of us, it affected our sense of well-being and our mental health. A lot of us became very fragile, and we're still in some ways recovering. But I think what I learned is that a Christian community can be a real place of faith and hope and love. And funnily enough, that's the subtext on our the cover of our Calling and Vision document, looking to the future with faith, hope and love. Little did I know when that was written 18 months ago where we would be going, but this has really helped us. This is what we're called to do. At a time when there is so much that's uncertain, when there's such anxiety and challenge, we need to be people of faith and hope and love. And during the pandemic, although there have been many difficult things, what I didn't anticipate was there would be so much that was good here in this cathedral. There's been so much love extended to me and amongst other people I know. There's been such a lot of faithful prayer every day, by one means or another, latterly through Zoom evening prayer. And now, of course, we're back in the cathedral. But I absolutely know that the prayer and the worship of the cathedral has been diligently undertaken every day, even if it's been from our homes. But little did we know what we were going to face. And we do face a big challenge in the future now to recover, but I have every confidence that we will. So here at Winchester, I've been relearning some of my lessons. One is to remain focused on the most important things and to try to keep articulating those. And the second is how to journey through real challenge and difficulty with other people, with faith and hope and love. So I feel that I'm still learning every day. And the important thing is to remain focused on the important thing, which is Christ at the centre of everything. And I still think that it's true what I set out with, which is my task is to share the gospel, grow the church and serve the people. And that despite the failings of the Church of England, which I'm sure we could share, I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to spend my life really working in the church and to come here as my final ministry, I hope. I'm really proud and I feel humbled to be Dean of Winchester. And really, I'm looking forward to all the lessons that are still to be learned. To learn about this place and to learn about preaching the gospel here and serving the people here. Thank you. Thank you.
Dean Catherine, what an opener to our new season of talks. I mean, the only regret is that you would be having now thunderous applause for that. It's not there. I mean, it's a fascinating journey you've described. It's absolutely obvious that your CV is absolutely obvious why you would judge the ideal candidate to be Dean of Winchester. I just noted just a few phrases: caring for the nation's heritage, your sort of guide, love your building and serve your parish, love liturgy and love buildings. Those are the sort of thoughts that make our members tick, of course. It just proves how lucky we are that you're our dean of this historic cathedral. It really does. I was reminded when you talked about being deacon. There was somebody complained to a bishop they were deacon and not being a priest, and the Benedicite now is not very often sung or these days, but you probably heard this, but the complaint was that there was no mention of deacons, and the bishop said, "Oh yes, there is. Oh, all ye green things upon the earth." Anyway, so that's the life I go. Well, look, it was absolutely superb, and it really is fascinating. And as I say, we're very, very proud of you, if I may say so.
Thank you.
So can I hand back now then to Lucy? Because I think Lucy then, I'm sure there's some questions.
Yeah.
Lucy, can you take over now? Thank you so much.
I will. Yes, there's a couple of questions that have come into me on the chat. The first question is around Theological College now. You did mention that it's very different to when you were there, and they're probably doing a lot more to teach trainees how to deal with the things you've talked about. But do you have any ideas about how they should teach sort of the practical side of the job? And do you know anything in more detail about what does happen now?
Well, perhaps that's an idea for another talk. We could get, we have recently had ordinands at the cathedral, and if you think about it, Tom Burden, who's formerly the headmaster of the school here, has just gone to Theological College. Nowadays, of course, a lot of the training is done in a non-residential way, so people do it in situ, and they're doing practical pastoral work, and they're working in a parish while they're doing their studies. So there's much more experiential work done now. And I think also more reflection on what we bring and our personalities and how we interact with other people. So a lot of the kind of contemporary psychological insights would be used now. It is a lot more applied and practical and vocational. I suppose I just hope that in that, and also usually people only get 2 years now, I hope that they do also get a chance to read as much ancient and contemporary theology as I did, just because it gives you a sort of storehouse for your imagination for the rest of your ministry. And it's really hard to get the balance right, but I think at the moment you would be very reassured about what the curricula is for Theological College education.
Actually, Tom Burden is lined up to come and talk to us at some point.
Good.
Yes, he is. Tom was meant to do a talk in May time, and he was going to bring a couple of choristers with him, which is why it wasn't really suitable to transfer to a Zoom talk. But I was then hoping, he said he'd come back from Oxford to do it face to face, but I think at this point probably the audience will be interested to hear. I think we are going to do that as a Zoom talk in the springtime. So it'd be really interesting to link what you've talked here with what he shares with us. So yes, thank you. There was another sort of a bit of a technical question. So one of the listeners was really interested when you remarked that when you were appointed, it had to come from Downing Street, and you had to check that the announcement had come. I'm just interested around the sort of historical and the technical side of that. How many dean's positions have to go through that process? Is Winchester, presumably Winchester is special, so anything you can add on that would be really interesting.
Yes, and this is different to when I was appointed Dean of Birmingham, because in that case, the Bishop of Birmingham appointed me. Now, with Winchester, I was appointed by Her Majesty the Queen. And so Downing Street were acting for her in the announcement. Obviously, she didn't interview me. She had representatives to interview me. So one of the people who was present at my interview would have been representing her through her Prime Minister. So it's just interesting, isn't it, that there's that sort of balance in the Church of England where cathedral deans, some of us are appointed by the royal family rather than the diocesan bishop. But it's not for every, you're right, I think it's the older cathedrals that this is the case. The younger cathedrals wouldn't have this relationship.
Oh, thank you, that's very interesting.
It's a crown appointment.
Crown appointment, yeah.
One other question. Somebody's interested about your role and with the diocese generally in terms of your interaction, and I suppose just thinking about potentially how Winchester is different to your other roles. Don't know if you want to make any comment on that.
Yeah. Well, it's lovely that I come from a parish ministry background, and I was actually a canon of a cathedral when I was vicar of Huddersfield, and I know how important the cathedral is to the parishes and the clergy of a diocese, and we can really offer kindness and care and interest. And it's just lovely when clergy have a Sunday off and they decide to come and worship in the cathedral, and we can just look after them, really. So every cathedral tries to serve its diocese and its diocesan bishop. And certainly one very good thing during the recent months is we've worked very closely with Bishop Tim. I mean, partly you might have noticed in worship at the first, Bishop Tim was having a Eucharist every Sunday from Wolsey, so we didn't want to compete with that, and we worked with him and we did things during the week that he couldn't do, and he did that on Sunday. So we try to work closely and to serve the diocesan bishop and serve the diocese. Understanding, of course, that sometimes we have slightly different challenges and pressures on us. So we also serve the nation and we serve the wider world. And I suppose cathedrals just try to juggle many different priorities, really. But amongst those, the diocese is one of our really great priorities.
Thank you very much. Now, I don't think there's, unless anybody has any other questions they want to shout out, I think we've probably come to the end of the questions. So I think all it leaves me to do is say thank you very much again for all of you joining and for the fantastically interesting talk this evening, Dean Catherine. We will be convening again in 2 weeks and a day. It's on a Wednesday, sorry, no, I think 4 weeks, on the 7th of October on a Wednesday. And we've got a well-known cathedral guide, Viv Ferris, who is coming to talk to us about the two famous Henrys, Henry Beaufort and Henry de Blois. So it'd be lovely to see as many of you then. Thank you to those of you who've made a donation for tonight's talk. I will send out the link again if